The year is 1876. The place, a winding river the Lakota call the Greasy Grass. For 300 years, the powers of the world had marched against the peoples of the plains. And for 300 years, those peoples had been pushed back. Treaty by broken treaty, mile by stolen mile. But on a single afternoon in late June, everything would invert. In less time than it takes the sun to cross a hand's width of sky, the most famous cavalry regiment in the United States Army would be surrounded, broken, and wiped out, to the last man. Their commander, a golden-haired soldier whose name still echoes through American history, would die on a bare hill of grass with the bodies of his men around him. 700 soldiers had ridden out to erase a people. 2,500 warriors were about to erase them instead. This is the Battle of the Little Bighorn, Custer's last stand. But you have almost certainly heard it told from the soldiers' side. Today, we tell it from the other side of the river, from the side that won. Welcome to Historical Club. To understand why the warriors fought as if the sky itself had fallen, you must understand what was being taken from them. At the heart of the Lakota world stood the Black Hills, Paha Sapa. Not merely land, the sacred center of the world. A place of vision and prayer and the bones of the ancestors. In 1868, the United States had signed a treaty at Fort Laramie, and in it, solemnly, in writing, promised that these hills would belong to the Lakota forever. Forever lasted 6 years. In 1874, an expedition led by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer rode into the Black Hills and found gold. And once there was gold, the promise meant nothing. Prospectors poured into the sacred hills. And rather than honor its own treaty, the government in Washington ordered every free band of Lakota and Cheyenne onto the reservations by the end of January 1876. Those who refused would be hunted as enemies of the United States. It was the dead of winter. The order was impossible to obey. And it was meant to be. Across the northern plains, the bands made their answer. They would not come in. Instead, through the spring of 1876, they came together. Along the Greasy Grass, a village rose unlike anything the plains had seen in living memory. Hunkpapa, Oglala, Miniconjou, Sans Arc, their northern Cheyenne allies, thousands upon thousands of people, lodges stretching for miles along the river, great herds of horses darkening the hills. At the spiritual heart of this gathering stood a Hunkpapa holy man whose name carried weight far beyond his own people, Sitting Bull. In the days before the battle, he danced the sun dance, offering pieces of his own flesh in sacrifice, praying for his people. And in his exhaustion, he was given a vision. Soldiers falling into the camp upside down, like grasshoppers dropping from the sky, their hats tumbling from their heads as they fell. To the Lakota, the meaning was clear. Soldiers were coming, and they would fall. They came in the heat of the afternoon on the 25th of June. Custer's 7th Cavalry had found the village. But Custer badly misjudged what he had found. He believed the warriors would scatter and run, as they had so often been forced to before. He did not grasp that he was riding toward the largest gathering of fighting men the plains would ever assemble. So he split his regiment. He sent Major Reno with 3 companies to strike the southern end of the camp, while he himself swung north with 5 companies to cut off the escape he was certain would come. Reno's men opened fire into the Hunkpapa camp, and the first to die were not warriors. They were women and children, caught in the gunfire at the village's edge. Among the lodges torn apart was the family of a Hunkpapa war leader named Gall. In a single moment, Gall lost 2 of his wives and 3 of his children. What the soldiers awakened that day was not a panic. It was a fury. Warriors poured out from the camp by the hundreds. Reno's charge stalled, then broke. His soldiers were driven back into the trees, then out of them, in a desperate, bloody scramble across the river and up onto the bluffs, leaving dead men floating in the water behind them. And now another leader rode into the storm. A quiet, strange, brilliant Oglala, the people called Crazy Horse. Only 8 days earlier, he had turned back another army, under General Crook, at the Rosebud. He understood war as few men ever have. He rode through the village rallying the young men, and then he turned the full weight of that gathering north. toward the second column of soldiers now visible on the ridges above the river. Toward Custer. Custer's 5 companies, roughly 210 men, were strung out along the high ground above the Greasy Grass, and they were already in trouble. Below them, around them, the land was filling with warriors faster than they could count. Gall, his grief turned to terrible purpose, led the Hunkpapa and Cheyenne up out of the valley and slammed into Custer's flank and rear, folding the soldiers back on themselves. And as the cavalry fought to hold the ridge, Crazy Horse delivered the stroke that sealed their fate. He swept downstream, crossed the river, and swung wide around the far end of the high ground, coming down on Custer from the north. The soldiers were now caught between 2 fires, with nowhere left to run. The fighting collapsed into chaos. Cavalry discipline dissolved. Men shot their own horses for cover and were overrun where they knelt. Companies were cut apart and destroyed, piece by piece, along the ridgeline. A last knot of soldiers, Custer among them, was driven onto a low rise that history would come to call Last Stand Hill. And there, among the bodies of their horses, the final survivors were killed. From the moment the warriors closed in to the moment the firing fell silent, it is believed to have taken less than an hour. When it was over, every man under Custer's direct command lay dead. Custer himself, his 2 brothers, his nephew, his brother-in-law. The pride of the United States Army swept from the earth on a hillside of summer grass. On the bluffs to the south, Reno and the late-arriving Benteen dug in and clung to their hill through a long and terrible night, and the day that followed, ringed by warriors, burning with thirst. They survived only because the village finally chose to let them. For as yet another army approached from the north, the great camp dismantled itself and moved off, the largest free gathering of the plains, peoples melting back into the country that had always been theirs. It was the greatest victory Native America ever won against the United States. And it was the beginning of the end, for the nation that had been humiliated did not retreat. It poured soldiers onto the plains with a vengeance, hunting the bands without mercy through the seasons that followed. Within a year, the great village was scattered and starving. Sitting Bull led his people into exile across the border, into Canada. And Crazy Horse, the warrior who had broken Custer, surrendered in the spring of 1877. He was killed that same autumn, run through with a bayonet, a prisoner, at a place called Fort Robinson. The soldiers had fallen into the camp like grasshoppers, exactly as the vision had promised. But the victory could not be kept. The Little Bighorn was the brightest flare of a world that was already being put out. A people who won everything, for a single hour, on a river they called the Greasy Grass. If this story moved you, if you believe history deserves to be told from every side of the river, and not only the side that wrote the textbooks, then do one thing for us right now. Hit that like button and subscribe to Historical Club so you never miss the stories the world tried to forget. Ring the bell, drop a comment telling us whose story we should tell next, and we will see you on the next one.